Standing Committee on Industry and Technology of the House of Commons. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format, along with a
1064 to discuss a request to address employment concerns at Stellantis LG new battery manufacturing facility in Windsor, Ontario. We'll now begin by opening the floor to discussion on this request to meet, and I recognize Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee members, for responding and coming today. I know some would probably like to be in the chamber right now, but here we go. So for those who are watching us and not the Minister of Finance right now, perhaps I could start off by explaining what we're doing here, and that is that we, a number of the opposition members moved a motion or a letter that we have a special meeting to discuss the media reports that came out late last week that up to 1,600 jobs at the Stellantis, the new battery plant, EV battery plant, the Stellantis plant in Windsor, would be filled by residents of South Korea. And I know there's some claim that this is not the case, but for some strange reason, the ambassador from South Korea actually thinks it's the case, since the ambassador for South Korea held a number of meetings in Windsor with Windsor officials saying that they needed to find accommodation in Windsor for 1,600 people from South Korea who were coming to work at the battery plant. And obviously this is a great concern, and it's a great concern because I go back to the original announcement of the EV battery plant for Stellantis in Windsor back in March, I believe it was. Well, the first one was before the, I think President Biden brought out the IRA, and it was an agreement, I believe, from the federal government to pay about $500 million of the construction costs of this new plant under the Strategic Investment Fund, the SIF program of ISED. And at that time, the Minister of Industry said this is great news for Canadian jobs. Now, subsequent to that, when the IRA from President Biden came in, there was another contract that the government signed after that with Volkswagen, as we all know, for Southwest Ontario, which is another contract of $778 million of federal government subsidy to subsidize the building of that plant, and another $15 billion of subsidy for the battery assembly, not manufacturer. These are assembly plants. And just so people are clear, these are assembly plants that right now are not manufacturing batteries, but are actually assembling batteries for EVs, of which 80% of the parts for EV batteries in the world right now are actually manufactured in China. So these parts will be coming over to Canada and put into this plant to be assembled, into batteries, which would then go, in most cases, into the U.S. where the cars will be assembled. And contrary to assertions that the minister made today and others have made, the Conservatives have actually not said whether we support or don't support these, because we haven't seen the contracts. And it's hard to make a judgment on whether or not we have a good deal when you haven't seen the contracts, particularly contracts that require $15 billion of taxpayer subsidy. So in essence, what we have is a secret contract that has some sort of job commitments in it, but clearly not job commitments that require Canadians to be hired, since the ambassador from Korea is saying they're going to bring in 1,600 people from South Korea to assemble a battery primarily manufactured in China and assembled here to go to the U.S., to be assembled in vehicles which will be put together in the U.S. and presumably most of them sold in the U.S. So in the absence of having the details of that contract, it's impossible for taxpayers to understand whether or not there is a contract that compels Stellantis and their subsidiary now in Windsor to actually hire Canadians, because one would think if you're going to give that level of subsidy that you would actually put in the contract that the job commitments are for Canadian jobs. So we are here now to discuss doing an urgent meeting on several meetings, I think, that need to be to get to the bottom of this issue of why it is that a contract was signed that allows a Korean car company to bring in workers from South Korea rather than hiring Canadians, as has the ambassador for South Korea has said publicly that they will do. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to, just to frame the discussion, move a study motion if I could, and I believe the clerk has a copy of it, and I'll read the motion in. So the motion reads as follows. Given that the Government of Canada gave a multi-billion-dollar subsidy for an EV battery manufacturing facility in Windsor, Ontario, and that in recent days it has been revealed that as many as 1,600 jobs will be going to foreign workers instead of Canadian workers, the committee undertake a 6-meeting investigation to determine how the Government of Canada structured the deal that prioritizes foreign workers over Canadian jobs and paychecks, and that the committee hears testimony from the Minister of Industry for 2 hours, the Minister of Finance for 2 hours, who has obviously been very vocal on this, the Minister of Employment and Social Development Canada, the Mayor of Windsor, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, officials from the Department of Industry, the CEO of Nexstar, Dennis Lee, Unifor National President Lana Payne, and all other witnesses deemed relevant by the committee, and the committee order the full unredacted contract with Stellantis LG regarding Nexstar EV battery manufacturing facility in Windsor, Ontario, all documents related to government funding and Canadian job creation at the proposed factory, the labour market impact assessment application from Stellantis, and the government's response, and that these documents be produced within 7 days of this motion being adopted. So for the purpose of framing the debate, and I'm sure there'll be some discussion about from various parties on elements of that, and we're putting it on the table as a starting point of, as we always do in this committee, as a collegial committee, to discuss how we can go about discussing this urgent thing. And I don't think it can wait until the new year or after we're done C27, which won't be until into the new year, because this issue is happening now. There's 130 people, according to the public reports, now working on this project, and the company itself has already said that 100 of them, and in fact, Minister Wilkinson has said 100 of them, are from South Korea already working on this project. So most of the employment to date is not South Koreans who are residents of Canada. They are South Koreans that have come here from South Korea as the starting point of this 1,600-person hiring that the ambassador for South Korea says that Stellantis is doing. So I'll leave it to that for now, Mr. Chair, and turn it over. I know there's a speakers list to others who want to make an intervention.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Perkins. So we have a motion on the floor, and I recognize MP Massé.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and apologies, I'm a few blocks away. I have a cold, so I don't want to come into the same room as everybody else. I support this motion with some amendments, and I'll get to my amendments later just to scope it a little bit better with regards to where we need to get to. I think one of the most important things to recognize here is that I do support the investment that's taking place, and just outside of my riding of Windsor West. You know, I've come to this place back in the year 2002, trying to get a green auto strategy done. Actually, in 2004, we actually tabled a plan with Dr. David Suzuki and CAW.
MP Massé, just 1 second. Your sound has faded. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I don't think it's on your end, MP Massé. Okay, now it seems to be working. You're back.
All right, there. Yeah, I'm sure that it was more pleasurable when you couldn't hear me, but at any rate, I will resume with saying that basically, you know, I came to this place in 2002, and one of the reasons was for a green auto strategy. We lost many jobs lost in Windsor in Ontario when Canada was number 2 in the world in automotive manufacturing, and we now slipped to 8th. And so I support this project going forward, but there's been a lot of concerns raised, not only just the Swiss one, but also the Volkswagen one, and my concern resides on the transparency and accountability file of this. And so this, came about, and the renegotiations, most recent one, was related to the Investment Reduction Act of the United States. So for myself, this is critical in terms of having the opportunity to make sure that we're going to get the most out of the jobs here. And the story has changed even the last number of hours. So there was originally one position that was talked about. Now there's hundreds. And there's a lack of supports in the community that are very important for the amount of workers that are supposed to be brought in. That hasn't even really been discussed too much to this point. So what I would like to do is amend the motion by deleting. I don't believe that we need to hear from, at this point in time, from Unifor National President Lana Payne. I would rather have Canada's Buildings Trades Unions, Sean Strickland, present instead. The Minister of Immigration, the Minister of Trade, the Ambassador to Korea, because as was noted by Mr. Perkins, the Ambassador came down to Windsor, and he came down to Windsor, and either, the Ambassador had intentions, or we don't know what was taking place, but the Windsor Police tweeted out 1,600 potential people coming in. And so I don't think the Ambassador to Korea actually comes to Windsor to vacation. He was here for a particular reason, and we'd like to have that testimony in front of ourselves. And we'd also believe that that would be important. And I don't believe we need the Mayor of Windsor at this point in time as well. This is a federal contract that is a very important. And, perhaps in the future, the province might be invited as well. That's a possibility. But I'll conclude my comments right now so we can kind of move on this. I think that shedding light is very important for a national auto policy that I've advocated for many years. And I believe that, Canadians do want to see us transition and do want to be part of those things that are necessary for our future. And the best way to do that is to have transparency for people. And that will build the public confidence that's necessary. So the plant has already had a little bit of an issue with regards to, there was a stalling to actually renegotiate. The government's had 2 negotiation points that have taken place, and I think it's reasonable to get the answers that are necessary right now and to ensure that, every single possibility is done. And it's important to note that when, we have foreign labor that comes in, say, for example, the agricultural sector, that the company pays for that foreign labor. It's not paid or subsidized by the Canadian taxpayers. And this is where I think people are a little bit concerned with what's taking place. And more importantly, it was never talked about. When we had the announcements, the ribbon cuttings, and a number of times there's been a lot of political people that have taken credit for what really is the workers that have actually saved our auto industry by our quality with Unifor and our commitment and the Unifor negotiations that have actually created the opportunities for investment. That's really where things are. And the fact of the matter is that the government's response to the Inflation Reduction Act of the United States has been one of just to match that, but also without the transparency that they provide in the United States. The United States has a much more transparent process for that. And so we need to keep that in mind, because it's important about this plant is not only the work that's being done to build it, but also the workers later on that will be in there, and to have the full confidence of the Canadian public. So I thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to speak, and hope that we can actually improve this situation right now, because it is worthwhile.
Merci, Monsieur Massé. Before I yield the floor to other MPs, you've moved an amendment, Mr. Massé, to the motion. Would you mind repeating, maybe with a little more clarity, the precise terms of your amendment? Because now the committee will have to debate your specific amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and apologize for just throwing that out there. Was dealing with it. So we would strike out the Mayor of Windsor from the motion. So that's in the middle of about 6 lines down. And we would take out the Unifor National President Lana Payne, and what we would substitute in for those 2 witnesses was Canada's Building Trades Union, Sean Strickland, because right now it's more about the building. The Minister of Immigration and the Minister of Trade, because they did a press conference and raised some of the issues that I think will be important to the committee. And also the ambassador of South Korea to be added as well. And that's one of the reasons why we don't need the mayor. Would be really that's the important thrust of what took place.
Thank you, MP Massé. So everyone's heard the amendment proposed by MP Massé, which we will now...
Point of order, Chair. Could you just have repeated the very first name that was among the persons to add?
Urges the first name.
That was Sean Strickland, S-E-A-N, and the last name is Strickland, S-T-R-I-C-K-L-A-N-D. He's the director of Canada's Building Trades Unions.
Thank you, MP Massé. So on my list, and now an amendment has been moved, so keep that in mind, colleagues, as we proceed, but I had MP Sorbara. Go to the main. Okay, well, we need to debate the amendment first, and I'll keep your name for when we come back on the main motion. So anyone wants to speak to the amendment proposed by MP Massé? I see Mr. Viss and Mr. Perkins.
I'll just say that I think Mr. Massé's suggestions are pretty reasonable and are in the line with what our motion is seeking to achieve, and I would, Rick, I think agrees with me. We generally be supportive of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins.
Yeah, things have moved quickly like they always have on these things. And so when I wrote the motion the other day, this is a good update to what we now know. So I would support this as well.
Okay, I see no more comments really on the amendment. So should I call it to a vote, or do we have consent for the amendment? I'm looking around the room. Vote, or I will put it to a vote just to be sure. Just Madam Clerk, are we ready to proceed? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
So on the amendment of Mr. Massé?
Yeah.
Mr. Turnbull?
Yes.
Mr. Gahir?
Yes.
Madame Lapointe?
Oui.
Mr. Sorbara?
Yes to support Mr. Massé.
Mr. Van Bynen?
Yes.
Mr. Généreux?
Oui.
Mr. Perkins?
Yes.
Mr. Viss?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Monsieur Lemire? Mr. Massé?
We.
That's good.
Apologies, colleagues. I didn't read the room, but we had consensus. Okay, good. So we're back to the main motion as amended by Mr. Massé, and I'll now yield the floor to MP Sorbara.
I'd like to yield the floor to no, that's fine. To Parliamentary Secretary Kuzmarchik if he's next on the list.
In that case, I had Sébastien Lemire, and you were next, Rick. So, Mr.
J'ai pas de misère à entendre.
Okay.
I have no trouble hearing.
You have the floor. Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I feel compelled to come here and provide a little bit of important context here to the discussion that we're having today. The battery plant, Stellantis battery plant, is located in my riding. It is located, in fact, steps away from my home. And I get a chance every single day to see this incredible battery plant rising from the ground. And it represents tremendous hope for our community. And I want to provide some context here. 8 years ago, 8 years ago, our community had 11.2% unemployment. This was under the Conservative government. This was when the leader of the current Conservative opposition was the Minister of Employment. We had 11.2% in my community, 11.2%. Young people, unemployment was in the high 20%. Young people were leaving our community because they had no hope. There were no jobs. You had families leaving to Alberta because there were no jobs. You had stores that were shuttered, businesses that were closed. Those were dark times. Dark times, Mr. Chair. This is the most important investment in the history of my community. This is our future for my community. This is hope for my community. And it is important that when we speak about it, that we speak in facts, not politics, not games, facts, because there is so much riding on this battery plant. Let me provide you some facts. There are 900 workers building the battery plant as we speak, representing all the trades. LiUNA, millwrights, operators, you name it, sheet metal workers. And they're all Canadian. And the vast majority are from Windsor. There will be 2,500 workers, Canadian workers in total, that will build that plant. When the plant is operational, there will be 2,500 workers building 2 million batteries every year. Those 2,500 workers will be local, and they will be Canadian. And that is something that was confirmed when I spoke this morning with the president of Unifor Local 444, Dave Cassidy, who confirmed that there will be 2,500 workers, that they will be local, and they will be Canadian. Yes, there will be Korean workers that come to Canada to help with the installation of the equipment. For anyone that has ever set foot in a factory or been part of a manufacturing town like mine, you'll realize very quickly that that is normal. When a Canadian company like Centerline, for example, or Valiant from Windsor, when they would sell a product or a machine to Alabama, you would have Canadian workers traveling there to help with the installation of the equipment, especially as some of that equipment is proprietary, and especially during the warranty period. It's just something that happens in manufacturing. And at the same time, we know that there will be some Korean workers that will move to Windsor because they will be working with Canadian and local workers building the batteries. Why? Because this is a new industry. This is a brand new industry we are trying to build from scratch. This is the first battery plant in Canada. We don't have the expertise, the full expertise. And it's why we will rely on a partnership with our Korean partners who have been building batteries for 30 years. LG is the world leader in batteries. They have 24,000 patents on the construction of batteries, and we will need them because we will be competing with every other battery manufacturer in the world. And we got to get this right because everything is riding on it. But the 2,500 workers building the batteries will be Canadian, and they will be local. I understand that the EV sector is a threat to the Conservatives. I understand that. A, because they don't believe in climate change, and also because the electric battery, because the EV battery plant would demonstrate that having an environmental plan means being successful economically. And more specifically, it means jobs for communities
because Mayor
like
Chair,
mine.
1 second, I have
Point of order.
a point of order from Mr. Perkins. Mr. Perkins.
Has that member been substituted in for the committee? Because if not, he has no right to talk.
Yeah, no, I've just consulted with the clerk, and there's no need for a substitute to be, like, any MP can come on the committee and speak to the issues addressed, and he's been recognized by the chair. And I've just confirmed with the clerk. that this is the case. So I'll let Mr. MP Kuzmierczak pursue.
You can sub for me if you like.
And I want to say again, so I understand this. I understand that the success of the EV battery plant is a direct threat to the Conservatives, because it will demonstrate that when you have an environmental plan, you have an economic plan, and you have jobs. And it's not just the battery plant in Windsor in partnership with our Korean partners. There is in Quebec, Northvolt, which is a Swedish company that has committed $7 billion to build a battery plant in Montreal and Quebec that will provide jobs for 3,000 Quebec residents. Yes, I imagine there will be
Point of
some.
order?
Yes, Mr. Perkins.
Would he speak to the motion which has nothing to do with the Quebec plant? It's only about Stellantis.
Mr. Perkins, I believe it is pertinent to the motion, and when we've always been and I have always been very liberal in my interpretation, and I've heard I've heard members speak on various motions, and they have a certain liberty, and to me it speaks to the motion at hand. So I'll let Mr. Kuzmierczak pursue.
Thank you. The battery plant, the LG battery plant that we will build with our Korean partners is the beginning. You have the Northvolt battery plant in Montreal, Quebec, $7 billion investment that will provide 3,000 jobs for Quebecers. Fantastic, fantastic. And I guarantee you that there will be folks from Sweden that will come to Montreal and that will help Montreal and help Quebec be successful in building batteries. Volkswagen, another $10 billion investment in St. Thomas, 5,000 workers, 5,000 workers. And I'm almost certain that there will be some Germans that will come to St. Thomas. They will be welcomed by that wonderful community, that warm community. And they will help St. Thomas revitalize its manufacturing and auto industry and help build batteries for the North American market. Mr. Chair, there's $30 billion worth of investment that have taken place in the last couple of years. Canada is the #3 country in the world for foreign direct investment. We are partnering with the world to build electric vehicles, to build batteries in this country. Canada is leading the transition to zero-emission vehicles. And it burns the Conservatives' butt to hear that. And so, Mr. Chair, I want us to speak in facts. I want us to put the politics aside, the games aside, because there is far too much on the line for manufacturing communities like mine that have suffered and struggled for far too long. This battery plant is our future, is my community's future. It is our great hope. And it will be the future that is built by Canadian workers, by Windsor workers. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Kuzmierczak. J'ai maintenant Monsieur.
I now have Mr. Lemire. Thank you, Chair. To keep the debate moving very spontaneously, the other Windsor MP wished to respond. I'd like to hear from him before I say something. Unfortunately, Mr. Lemire, I have a long list already of people wishing to take the floor, so I can't start jumping around based on topic. So I will put you to the end. Is that what you prefer? Thank you. Which brings me to recognize MP Viss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, we're going to have a conversation about facts. It was in 2000 excuse me, I can't hear myself speak. It was in 2008 that Stephen Harper saved the auto industry in Southern Ontario, Mr. Kuzmierczak, and I'd hope you'd actually stay and listen to what you want to say, or are you just going to make a political statement and walk out? I guess your butt's too burnt to sit here and listen. That's a fact. You're not willing to sit and listen after you just go off on that partisan speech.
I have a point of order for MP Lapointe, from MP Lapointe.
I believe members need to address their comments through the chair, and I would also ask that we use parliamentary language.
Well, thank you, Ms. Lapointe. I just used the exact same phrase as the member.
Mr. Viss, please, a point of order was raised. I'm considering it, and given the heated nature, I've been flexible on how members address
right.
each other, but given the heated nature of this debate we're having today, I'd rather have members address their comments through the chair. Mr. Viss.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do respect you, and I will put my comments through you. And as you have just witnessed, Mr. Chair, Mr. Kuzmarchik came in here to make a political statement about burning the butts of Conservatives and that this plant is a direct threat. After he made his political statement, he walked out of the room because I guess he really doesn't care
Point of order,
about
Mr. Chair.
the...
It's not appropriate. It's not appropriate to identify who is in the room and who is not in the room. Is that not a parliamentary understanding?
I don't believe it is in committee. However, I will ask Mr. Viss to try to stay above. You know what my mother used to say? Weak people judge persons. Strong people judge ideas. I would suggest, Mr. Viss, you continue on the ideas because I know you're bigger than that. So let's keep the personal out of it.
Okay. So we will speak to the facts, Mr. Chair. In 2008, it was Stephen Harper that bailed out the auto industry. It was the Business Development Bank of Canada that bought all leases from General Motors, the GMAC, their financing authority. So I'm not going to take any lessons from the government-sided members on the role of the auto industry and the perceived threats of the member who left the room regarding what is a significant contract. And you know, Mr. Chair, we all came together last spring, despite every attempt by the government to avoid transparency on the Volkswagen contract. They eventually relented, and we were able to see the contract. Now, unless Mr. Kuzmarchik has special access to government contracts that are deemed sensitive and secret in nature, I can't take his word for anything he said, because I have to assume, like any other member of Parliament who's not a member of Cabinet, they have not reviewed the contract and the statements he made regarding employment. The nature of that employment, whether it's Canadian or Korean, cannot be verified. All we can go off of is publicly made statements. That's what Mr. Kuzmarchik was stating, were public statements. And right now, Mr. Speaker, frankly, it's very hard to Mr. Chair, it's very hard to keep track of what all the public statements were. You know, I have lots of questions about this contract, just like I had about the Volkswagen contract, because I would be remiss if I didn't mention that it was Stellantis originally received a subsidy from the federal government much smaller than the subsidy they have before it right now. And many people made the argument that if we go forward with the Volkswagen contract to align with the policies put forward by President Biden in the United States, we would see a slippery slope of all major investments in the auto industry and other sectors asking for the exact same terms and conditions. Well, lo and behold, a few weeks after we were here, Stellantis halted the construction of that plant. And they said, unless the government of Canada ponies up and gives us billions upon billions upon billions upon billions of dollars more, we are going to pull this investment from the good people of Windsor. And you know what, Mr. Chair? We didn't hear a peep out of Mr. Kuzmarchik when that was happening. And that's really unfortunate that he wasn't standing up for his constituents when they needed him. So now we're in an untenable situation where every big company that wants to build a battery plant in Canada using Chinese minerals wants billions upon billions of dollars from the federal government. And I want to know, and I want to see the contract and understand what subsidies Stellantis is actually getting, because that's not a public fact right now. Quelles sont les subventions que Stellantis ont reçues déjà?
What subsidies have Stellantis already received? What are the funds that they will receive from the Government of Canada going forward? In the contract signed between the Minister and Stellantis, has the federal government agreed on a clause allowing Stellantis to hire Korean workers rather than Canadian workers?
Canada does have a free trade agreement and a labor mobility clause with the Government of Canada. That's a good thing. But the intention, and I worked at the Department of Foreign Affairs when this contract between Canada and South Korea was signed. And the intention was not for the government of Canada to subsidize foreign workers through major auto investments or subsidies. It was to promote the exchange of people, to build both of our economies up. And what I'm fearful of, without seeing this contract, is that that clause in the Canada Free Trade Agreement with South Korea will allow for powerful paychecks for Korean workers at the expense of Canadian taxpayers. I don't want my taxpayer dollars, nor do the constituents in Mission Matsby, Fraser Canyon, where we don't get big investments from the federal government unless it's a prison, by the way. We don't want our taxpayer dollars, and I can say that confidently on behalf of the people I represent, going to foreign workers, whatever the intention. So we need to figure out and get to the bottom of this contract. On doit savoir si le
We need to know whether the subsidies provided by the government will be paying for foreign workers for their salaries, and if that's the case, how much of our money will be given to each foreign worker.
If, in fact, the Canadian subsidy to Stellantis will fund foreign workers working on Canadian soil that are allowed by law to come into Canada under our free trade agreement. That's a fact. So there's lots of things we need to get to the bottom of here. But, Mr. Chair, for the member to come in and say that Conservatives need to be concerned about saying we don't have an environment policy and that we don't care about the people in Southern Ontario or the auto industry, that whatever the government's doing is a direct threat to my political party, I take issue with that. What is a direct threat to what the people I represent feel is that the government's not using taxpayer dollars wisely. And I will reiterate time and time again that the Industry Committee has a unique role in ensuring that these large subsidies do, in fact, what they're intended to do, and they cost what the government says they're going to cost. And if our recent work on this committee shows anything, is that the government has underestimated the true costs of their subsidies to these major global auto giants. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP Viss. MP Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all colleagues for the discussion right now. Look, the member from Windsor had a really great line at the end. He said there was far too much on the line, and I don't think that could be further from the truth right now. We have the largest investment ever for a Canadian manufacturer into this plant, $15 billion. We have, at the same time, reports coming out that say that of all the things promised from this plant, and let's talk about what the economic output of this plant was, we're not producing the stuff that goes into batteries. We are not producing cars in Canada. We're assembling batteries in Canada. And so the output of that is batteries assembled, which will be subsidized by the taxpayer, but it's jobs. When the minister pushed this initiative and this benefit to the Canadian car manufacturing industry into Windsor, the output was supposed to be jobs. And we've heard certain quotes like thousands upon thousands of jobs, but the member from Windsor verified the facts today. He said 2,500 permanent jobs. 2,500 would be temporary. It's the building of the plant. 900 which are there now. But he said 2,500 jobs. And the reports from Windsor Police, from the ambassador from Korea, said that 1,600 of those 2,500 would be from South Korea. So when we look at $15 billion being invested into this plant, the first time in history that we've spent this much money on a plant that's already existing. There's Volkswagen and other plants that are becoming. We have to get this right. There's too much on the line. When we look right now, and I know we have right now an economic update, I really imagine that we're going to still have a deficit right now. Does anyone say differently? Did they balance the books? No, I don't think so. So we're running a deficit. So when we say there's too much in the line, Canadians right now are struggling to heat and pay for their rent and for their mortgages, and Canadians right now are struggling to pay for groceries. So when we talk about the first number, which would have been based on what this $15 billion is, that's $1,000 per family at home. That's $1,000 coming from your taxes that's going into a plan. And if we want to see this replicated in Quebec and in BC and in other way across this country, we can't afford to see what's happening with SDTC right now, which is hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars being wasted and misused. We need to make sure that this money is well used, meaning that it's going towards Canadian workers. And when we look at then, I know the member from Windsor talked about looking at what we've taken this whole model from, which is the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act in the U.S., which is subsidizing production of batteries and other things for the green economy. I can tell you right now, I know for certain that in the IRA, when it comes to jobs and when it comes to sourcing material for batteries or otherwise, the Americans do one thing that we don't do in Canada. They put America first. They put it on everything in the U.S. And we look at our investment from Canada. The question, the biggest one that comes from this is Canada coming first? Is Canada making sure that it gets the output? If the only thing that we're getting from this deal are jobs, why aren't they all Canadian jobs? And I'll give you an example for the committee, because this was noted today. The Federal Employment Department has already granted permission for a temporary foreign worker to fill an administrative role. An administrative role, a job that was put out. So I guess the question of the committee, are you telling me that we couldn't find in the whole city of Windsor someone who was qualified to fill an administrative role? This has already been filled by a foreign worker. So if you're saying to the committee right now that we shouldn't be studying this, with $15 billion in the line, with 2,500 jobs that were promised, with reports from the Korean ambassador that 1,600 of those will be filled not by Windsorites or by Canadians, but from South Koreans. If the argument that the member from Windsor gave was, yeah, every plant brings in workers to install equipment. Sure, I'm in a food processing manufacturing cluster in Bay of Quinte, and all the time we have, and this is a problem with the government too. We bring in foreign workers, and they can't get permits for 6 months, but they have to come in, and they come in for 3 weeks. But 3 weeks they come in to install equipment. So if we're looking for accommodations for housing, how long were these 1,600 workers coming in to stay for? We don't have an answer to that. And I know in the House today, it's been talked about those disinformation. Then great, let's get the information on the table. Let's see the contract. One thing we want to see that's in here is the labor market assessment. We want to see where the labor gaps were, because when it comes to labor, when it comes to unions, when it comes to Windsor itself, we want to see manufacturing in Windsor, and we want to see if this is going to go forward in the future, we want to see it be successful in Canada. Everyone wants Canada to win. When we talk about Team Canada, Canada has to win. But more importantly, if this is going to be replicated with Volkswagen and outside of Windsor for other parts of this country, we have to have this be successful. And if I can tell you right now, if this is not successful, if we don't see the jobs that were promised created, if this is a waste of taxpayer dollars, then how can we justify going forward with any of this? Because it will be a failure to this government. And if this committee doesn't study that, that will be a failure. And certainly we want to see this go forward as being a success, and we need the answers for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, a quick point of order, if I could, please.
Yes, Mr. Massey.
I just want to make sure, I didn't want to interrupt Mr. Williams. I just want to be clear here, though. I'm the member for Windsor West, and I represent 3/5 of the city of Windsor, and the other member is Windsor-Tecumseh. So I just want to be clear, so I don't want to be confused with the other member. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Chair, I will clarify all my comments were to the member from Windsor-Tecumseh. I know the member from Windsor West represents his region very well. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you for this clarification, Mr. Massey. I'll now turn to MP Turnbull.
Well, I've got quite a few things to say, but appreciate the debate. I'm I think, we're in a situation here where, it's the day of the fall economic statement, which is fine. Members have chosen to call a 106.4 to study this, which is normally meant to be an emergency meeting. So obviously there's enough members that feel that this is an urgent debate to have that should take precedence over government legislation, which is C-27, which I think we've all agreed is a real high priority for this committee. I have quite a few concerns with some of the assertions that members opposite have made, which I don't feel are factual. And so I'll say why. But I think this feels to me like another delay tactic on C-27, which I think, again, we have all, Mr. Perkins, thank you for asserting something else that's untrue. But listen, I think that the key here is that
point of order.
You are using 106.4s.
Mr. Turnbull, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have a point of order from Mr. Perkins.
If I could, what assertion did I say wasn't true, or what?
Well, I don't know. You didn't have the floor, so you were speaking out of turn. But you want me to repeat what you're saying?
Well, you said it in the record.
So you want me to repeat what you're saying that wasn't supposed to be said because you weren't supposed to be speaking because you didn't have the floor.
Turnbull and
I have the floor as a point of order.
Mr. Perkins, this was not a point of order. It's a point of debate, and I will encourage, and I've said that many times before. This is not a place where we heckle and we shout across the floor. If you want to speak, I'll recognize you, and you'll have your time to speak. MP Turnbull.
So I think just to get back to what I was saying, which is that we know that there's some facts here that the Conservatives have conveniently left out. One of which is that there's only one temporary foreign worker so far that's been approved. I think everybody knows that labor market impact assessment is required for every single temporary foreign worker. There's no way to get approval without having a labor market impact assessment. And I know that Conservatives on other committees, in particular the Agriculture and Agri-Food Committee, which I sat on for over a year, Conservatives regularly advocated for the waiving of LMIAs or their extension for temporary foreign workers within the agricultural industry, which is interesting because, it's in direct conflict with what they're saying today, which is that they want to preserve local jobs. They have no problem waiving LMIAs when it comes to the agricultural industry and regularly advocate for more temporary foreign workers consistently. So thanks, Mr. Viss. I know that you don't have the floor either, but I appreciate your response. Maybe when you get the floor, you can respond. But I was on that committee, and so it's my experience that Conservatives are being inconsistent with the arguments that they've made on other committees. We also know, that this particular conversation isn't really about temporary foreign workers at all, because there's only one that's been approved so far. What's interesting, though, is that one of the facts that you've conveniently left out of your arguments is that there's an article today in the CBC that has basically elucidated the fact that the trade agreement that under Stephen Harper, when your current leader was in power, as the Minister of Employment, or I think it was just before that, there was a trade agreement negotiated with South Korea that included labor mobility provisions, which essentially opens the door for South Koreans who are eligible to work in Canada under those labor mobility provisions to work in Canada. So that free trade agreement that Conservatives actually set up allows individuals. Now, I'm not saying this is a bad thing, because I think what you need to understand is that, as my colleague P.S. Kazmierczak, I think, made very eloquently, which was that a battery manufacturing facility in Canada, the first of its kind, is going to require some specialized skill sets to get up and running. I think that's common sense. Like, Conservatives talk about common sense. Where's the common sense today? Do you not understand? And through you, Chair, I mean to be respectful, but I think common sense says that when you haven't run one of these facilities, you're going to probably have some intercompany transfers at the beginning that help to, install equipment and train local workers to run that facility. And I think that's what we're seeing here. So and the key here is that the job numbers that have been quoted are solid. There's 2,300 local jobs during the construction phase and 2,500 local jobs in the operational phase of the facility. Those are significant numbers of local jobs. We've heard Mr. Kazmierczak speak to how important that is to his community, how much that represents a growth in the local economy that is truly substantial and gives people hope. I think we've been saying this all along during our mandate as the governing party, that really building the economy of the future, and I get that Conservatives don't agree on this. They don't see the economy of the future as fighting climate change and drawing in local jobs and investments. In fact, I keep hearing that they don't want direct foreign investment. Like we heard today, and we heard the finance minister repeat this, and Minister of Innovation repeated this as well, that Canada is #1 in the world in foreign direct investment when you adjust per capita. It's #3 when you don't make that adjustment, but we're #1 when you adjust for per capita. So I don't understand why the Conservatives want to kick up dirt on this and try to prevent or, really, I think, create the perception, the misperception, that somehow this is bad for Canada or local jobs. This is not bad for local jobs. I think we know that it's good for local jobs. So the other point that maybe I'll make is that, a tweet is not a report. I mean, I find it kind of strange that this emergency debate of a 1064 is the result of a tweet from the Windsor Police Department. My dad was a detective and an inspector for Peel Regional Police, so I don't have anything against police. But I would just say it doesn't make sense to me that you would consider that as factual versus the very clear job numbers that our government has provided. And, I think that I guess the only other thing that I want to say is it just feels like, Conservatives are just opposed to everything. They're opposed to offshore wind industry in Atlantic Canada. They're blocking the Sustainable Jobs Act, which puts workers at the center of the energy transition. They're opposed to legislation banning replacement workers. And we saw today that in the House, they're opposed to a free trade agreement with Ukraine, with Canada and Ukraine. I don't understand how all of these things, which are good for workers, good for our country, bring in investment, and are part of that vision of building a stronger, sustainable economy that's prosperous and creates all kinds of good-paying jobs, is something that they can oppose so frequently. So, and I wish that we could get to a point here based on facts and understand that, to me, the work of C-27 that this committee has before it is imperative to get the legislation through. And I just hope we can come to our senses here. Thanks, Chair.
Merci, Monsieur Turnbull. Monsieur Massé, la parole est à vous.
Mr. Massé, you have the floor.
Listen, I don't want to be here, and I don't want to have to deal with this issue. I wish it wasn't happening. But the reality has, and the importance of this and looking at this is not only just for the Windsor area, but it's also for the Volkswagen plant. It's also for Quebec later on and British Columbia. This is about getting it right in terms of a massive subsidization that we're doing for the right reasons to keep up with our challenges with the United States and also the challenges of an industry that's transitioning. And I'd rather actually have Canadians trained through this process so that they can actually be used as a specialist in the future. And, so unlike the member for Windsor-Tecumseh, I actually worked on the shop floor at the Windsor Assembly Plant. I actually worked in the tool and die industry, and also was a job developer for persons with disabilities, placing people in these shops. So I know the jobs and how important they are. And there's a serious issue here with regards to the investment that we're making and the lack of training opportunities that are taking place. We've had 18 months to get this right. And if we have to get it right now, and why it's falling on the surface here is because we haven't done that time work that's necessary. So we're hearing, and I'd like to know if anybody really knows about the specifics of the jobs that actually we can't fill and accommodate. I think it was Mr. Williams referred to the one position that's been there, a clerical position. I mean, I'd even challenge some of the technical positions. We in Windsor have been building automotive components and also vehicles for over 100 years. And facts be told, quite frankly, originally, Jim Flaherty was opposed to actually intervention on the Oshawa and the GM and the Chrysler issues of the day. And he didn't want to pick winners or losers, but the evidence was put in front of him and he actually changed. To his credit. He deserves a lot of credit. In fact, we made money in the past by actually doing auto investment for Chrysler in the past, 1985. We actually invested there to actually save Chrysler at that point in time, and it paid a dividend back to taxpayers. So for me, I'm not afraid of actually bringing some of the highlights of this out, why the investment makes sense and why we have to be in the game for so many different reasons. But if we're going to be in the game and we're going to put taxpayers' money on the line, then there's every expectation that should be placed upon transparency and also measurables. And we've had the parliamentary budget officer in front of us talking about some of those things. So I don't see this as a conservative witch hunt with regards to a particular issue. I see this as a factual thing that we have to bring forward because it's going to have a pattern that will come after that. And again, would I like to actually be doing C-27? Absolutely. Will I want to have to deal with this? No, I wouldn't. But the reality is that we don't have a national auto policy that's transparent. We go from Hail Mary pass to Hail Mary pass at the last minute every single time on these deals. And that's why people have concerns. And I have every confidence that we shed the light about the importance of these jobs, the importance of the workers that will get these jobs if they're Canadians, why the value is there for the rest of Canada. And yes, it's going to be a very difficult thing to go through in some respects because company officials and others will have to come forward and talk about different things. But at the same time, it's responsible for us, and we don't need to make other communities actually go through what we're going through right now. It's not fun for me as a member for Windsor West that represents 3/5 the city of Windsor and come from an auto tradition to actually have to go through this. But I still believe in the industry. I believe in the people. I believe in what we're doing. And I think that if we can make it better for the other developments and the economic investment that we're doing, then we're all better off at the end of the day, and we're doing our job as parliamentarians. And sometimes doing your job is not comfortable. It's not things that you want to do, but you have to fight for it. I'll finish with this. We had to do the same thing with the Gordie Howe Bridge. We were building a new bridge in my riding. For years, we were told we couldn't do it, we shouldn't do it. And it was often, put in politics, and we faced off against an American billionaire. And we faced off against OMERS company, the pension fund, and we defeated bad proposals to get the right thing done after a lot of work and effort. And you know what? I'd rather put in for a few meetings here, some work and effort to make this better for everybody. And I'm not afraid. I am not afraid to speak about the value of investing for the people of Windsor, Tecumseh, and Essex County at any point in time. And we need the support because it's not our fault the United States is poaching manufacturing jobs, but that's really what they've been going after. But at the same time, I can't turn my back on my responsibility as a parliamentarian to make sure that taxpayers' dollars are being spent in the best way possible. That's the balance. And that's the balance that I see in the motion that we're looking at and what we're trying to do. Again, would I rather be doing something else? 100%. Why am I here? Because we have poor planning and a poor commitment to making sure that taxpayers understand where their dollars are going for. And that's why the NDP has always consistently called for a national auto policy that's also been crafted by the workers. When we get to that point in that day, maybe we won't have meetings like this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair.
Merci pour la promotion.
Thank you for the promotion. Mr. Massé, now over to Mr. Sarbara. You're recognized, sir.
Chair, and thank you to my colleagues for their interventions. I do want to say to the member from Windsor West, I think that's Mr. Massey, if I remember that, the two ridings down there. Brian, you mentioned that you were in the tool and die industry, and I think my respect for you has even increased higher. As we know, in Ontario, tool and die makers and folks that work in those shops are a lot of mom and pop shops all over Ontario, and I don't want to say it's a field that not many young people know about, and many people are going into. And it's actually a great field to go into. You work in the tiers of the suppliers, where there's 1, 2, 3, and you can make a heck of a lot of money. It's very skilled. So Brian, hats off to you if you were in the tool and die business, because there are a lot of shops in Windsor. I know that your area from, and some family that's down there, that they're in that industry, and it's something that I applaud. And that's how some of our firms, auto parts suppliers, whether it's Magna, Linamar, were founded on that basis. So kudos to you. The Chair, I wanted to speak to the main motion for a couple of reasons. First off, as was noted, prior, the auto industry, Canadian auto industry, has gone through many iterations and a very bumpy ride the last since the early 2000s. I do remember vividly the 2008-2009 period, which was the great financial crisis at that time, and what that happened, and the intervention that was made by the Obama administration, the removal of healthcare costs from the Detroit Big Three at the time that they were called the United States, here different, and how full circle we've come to today. And the intervention, and I would say the collaboration that's been done between industry, labor, and government to land the investments by Stellantis in Windsor, to land the investment by Volkswagen in St. Thomas, and to land a number of subsequent investments along the battery supply chain across Canada, from British Columbia to Ontario to Quebec to Nova Scotia to many other places that will benefit. And I think with regards to the way we talk about, because I really hope we can focus this conversation on the foreign direct investment aspect, whether it's Toyota investing here, whether it's, because I just saw them outside, folks from Ferrero Rocher who have a plant in Brantford, Ontario, that employs 1,500 people in that community. And it's important to continue to attract foreign direct investment here in Canada. It's great jobs. They tend to be higher paying jobs, tend to be provide higher benefits. But many times when those plants are initially set up, there's obviously, what I would call a transfer of knowledge, a transfer of technology, where representatives from those firms will come to Canada. I see it in my riding in Vaughan. We have a huge manufacturing cluster. And folks will come in to install machines, train the local workforce on how to operate the machines, and so forth. And I really fundamentally believe on this frontier that we are going down the same path. Canada does not have a footprint in the battery space currently. We are building that footprint with, frankly, foreign know-how. There's a thing called intellectual property that we're very well aware of. And we know that intellectual property transfer is happening here into Canada, both via Stellantis and Volkswagen and Northvolt and others. And we're going to let that happen naturally. At the same time, I obviously share every member's concerns when taxpayers' dollars are utilized in any sort of capacity to encourage investment that is used to the benefit and near an almost full benefit of Canadians. So whether it's the CBTU, the Canadian Building Trade Union members, working to build the facility, whether it's the outside skeleton, as you'd call by steel, or the inside finishing, those type of building, that type is used, that the workforce, which would be deemed to be called permanent workforce at the facility, be used, and obviously to the maximum point of be Canadian individuals. I think we all share that desire and that goal. At the same time, I don't think it's healthy to get in a debate of any sort, and I don't think it's there. But I don't think it's healthy to get in a debate of whether we have foreigners from foreign companies coming here and taking jobs or not. I think that's a very unhealthy debate to get into. I don't think it's a debate that is healthy in any way. And I think with the number of companies operating here in Canada, whether they're from U.S. or other domiciled areas that invest in Canadians, I think it's a benefit, a big net benefit to our economy. I will say, obviously, the number that was revealed of 1,600 jobs or not, I don't personally know whether that number is correct or not. My understanding, it is not a correct number. The way that trade agreements work, we all know, for example, under CUSMA, I had the privilege of working in the United States in New York City for a number of years, and I worked under an H-1B1, and then I went under the temporary national visa that you can easily get and easily work in if you're in a certain designated profession, and vice versa for U.S. professionals coming to Canada. We have programs that bring in foreigners to work in Canada, a Global Tech High Stream program, like less than 2 weeks. Folks can be here. So obviously there is a huge benefit from foreign expertise. There's a huge benefit from folks coming here with very specialized skills, whether it's and I don't mean to digress, and I try to get back on relevance, whether it's specialists coming in to work in certain hospitals or work in AI or other segments. I do share the concern from the opposition, from the folks across the aisle, with regards that we need to make sure that taxpayer dollars that are being invested in a facility as such, because we do know the reason why we are here at this moment in time is not only because of the headlines that came across, and we all know that we obviously need to verify whether headlines are accurate. My understanding is that the number of jobs listed, from what we understand, what we gathered, is not accurate. But we also need to understand that the reason why we're here is because in response to the Inflation Reduction Act, we had to put in place as a government, supported by virtually everyone in industry, to maintain our manufacturing footprint, specifically within the auto sector, and to build that electric vehicle supply chain. We needed to respond to the Inflation Reduction Act, and we did through a number of subsidies that were put in place. And we responded with agreements with a number of operators, and where we will have a production footprint. With regards to the motion itself and so forth, like even the language, structure a deal that prioritizes foreign workers over Canadian jobs. Remember, anybody coming to work here in Canada is a Canadian job. Yes, we need to ensure that a majority of those jobs, if not all, are filled by Canadians. At the same time, be very cognizant of the fact when the official opposition uses that type of language. When Toyota set up its 2 plants in Cambridge, or Honda set up its plant in Alliston, or companies invest in British Columbia that may foreign domicile, they are creating Canadian jobs. And they will bring their workers over for a period of time, and continually, because their head office is located overseas, to help make sure that the plant runs efficiently. If I can give another example, Mr. Chair, on our break week, I visited downtown Toronto, went to a foreign investment vehicle with partnership here in Canada. Went to it's called Italy, an Italian food operator that has stores throughout the world. They employ 500 workers, Canadians for the most part, at their location in Yonge and Bloor in downtown Toronto. Yes, there are a number of individuals of Italian citizenship that work there from the parent company, but again, the investment that was made in partnership with Canadian investors, a significant one, is open up 500 jobs in downtown Toronto, and they open up a new location in Sherway Gardens, and again creating another 200 or 300 jobs for Canadians. So this, to me, is about jobs, jobs, jobs. This is ensuring that Canadians get those jobs and work towards that. I do share MP Massey's concern, MP Perkins' concerns, and any Canadian citizen where federal dollars are involved, where there's an investment or to attract the investment here to Canada, that we provide for, that those jobs go to Canadians, but that we recognize the fact that foreign multinationals or foreign companies will need to bring their expertise over to help get the facility up and running, especially and particularly where new complete technology is being put to use. So with that, Chair, I'm going to stop there if I need to continue making a statement with regards, because to go back, and for those of you who may or may not know that, I've covered this sector for over 20 years. I was one of the lead analysts at a rating agency covering the auto parts sector, initiated coverage on all the auto sector folks, and was an analyst covering the OEMs for 3 years, and I covered it on the bond desk for Scotia, all the Canadian dollar debt issuers on the auto sector. And I've been to the Detroit Auto Show many, many, many times and traveled both in Europe and in Asia to meet with the executives of these companies, been to BMW and Mercedes and all that, and Peugeot, and in the time Fiat and Torino. So I do know the sector extremely well, and it's something where I think today I applaud and I'm quite proud of what the government's done to create an entire sector where you'll see a continuum of everything from the supply chain, the auto part suppliers, to we need to get those mines and the critical minerals and get that away from China, to our battery manufacturers, to the assembly plants that we have here in Canada. So a really big, and I dislike using the cliche words of transformation and transition, all that stuff, but a really big development of an industry here in Canada, which for many generations, or let's hope for as long as possible, where there's always these Schumpeter creative destruction forces that are alive in the economy, which I love, but for many, many, many years and decades to come, will provide great jobs. I know in Mr. Jean-Leroux, I think you're from the province of Quebec, and Quebec is benefiting from this. I remember when we had the St. Thérèse plant, auto plant in Quebec, and Hyundai was there for a while, and GM was there, and now we're seeing investment return to the province of Quebec within the auto sector, which I think is just phenomenal and fabulous news. So I think when we speak about that sentence prioritizes foreign workers over Canadian jobs, I get a little dicey about that. I think these are Canadian jobs. They're for Canadians, but we need to make sure that, they have opportunity to fill them. But when we need to bring in the foreign expertise to these plants, that we all understand that's the way the business world works, that's the way labor works, and that Canadians can be trained up to understand how this technology works, and that they can do the job that these individuals have been doing for literally many years back home, and where that intellectual property exists within the human capital of these individuals, so they can continue on that march. Chair, I want to turn over because others may want to chime in on the notice of the motion. I do have much more to say, but at the same time, we'll stop right there. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Sorbara. Monsieur Lemire.
Thank you, Mr. Sorbara. Mr. Lemire, the floor is yours. Thank you, Chair. We are missing the fall economic statement, and I so look forward to hearing whether we will be investing in mining, because that would launch quite a debate, given the context of Stellantis and Volkswagen and all this news. If we were to develop this entire supply chain right beside the mines and ensure the mines are dug, this would be very helpful. Now, many questions, particularly about labor. I think this study must be carried out. Thus, I am going to suggest the following amendment: to be able to speak then of a 6-hour study rather than 6 meetings, and at the end that the documents be produced in both official languages. I think that this is fundamental to our process, along with the amendment that was put forward and has been integrated, the amendment of Brian's. I think that we will be able to reach consensus on this as well. I think that the part about the ministers will be very important, very legitimate questions that we shall have for them about the economy of Canada, the economy of Quebec within the framework of the investments being undertaken here. And I certainly intend to ensure that we in Canada remain attractive, as Quebec has, for foreign direct investment. And I'm concerned about the eventual effect of this sort of motion that seems to always wish to kick things up and question everything. But I do think there are some legitimate concerns. That's why I will back this. But I do suggest 6 hours of meetings and both official languages for the documents. Thank you, Mr. Lemire. So we have an amendment, just to clarify that, to ensure that everyone has understood exactly what the amendment says, that the committee undertake a 6-hour rather than 6-meeting study, and at the very end, in the last sentence, that the documents be produced in both official languages. Do you maintain as well within 7 days of the motion being adopted? I ask simply, knowing the needs for time for translation. Yes, indeed, this is a matter of translation resources. I'm not the most knowledgeable about what the resources would be at the time, but perhaps simply say that as soon as the documents are translated, we would receive them, something to that effect. But I cannot say how many days that would take. All right, so we would add in both official languages within 7 days of, yes, be produced in both official languages. So I'm just trying to see how to write that. As quickly as possible, once this motion has been adopted. Yes, we would have to drop the idea of 7 days. That might not be realistic, depending on the number of documents that would be at issue. So be produced in both official languages as quickly as possible following this motion being adopted, or after this motion is adopted. Has everyone heard the amendment being put forward? I have a list of people wishing to speak to the main motion, but as you know, we do need to address the amendment. Anything to add? Mr. Turnbull.
Ask for clarification whether it's realistic time frame for 7 days. I know
we
that
just had this discussion, Mr. Turnbull. It might have been lost in translation, but I'll
No.
just repeat the sentence as it stands. I'll say it in French because I have my notes in French, so
Sure.
I'll speak slowly for translators. Que ces
That these documents be produced in both official languages as quickly as possible after this motion has been adopted.
after all, yeah, I agree to that. That makes sense.
Est-ce qu'il y a des commentaires? Non.
Any comments? Not seeing any. Online, Mr. Massey? No. Then I take it that this motion is adopted unanimously. It's passed. Thank you. We now have this amended motion. Do I have any more speakers? I had Mr. Perkins, Mr. Généreux, Mr. Sorbara, Mr. Arbine as well. Do you still wish to speak to the main motion?
Okay, well, I'll get back to my list that I had. Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to repeat everything that everyone else has said. I just will add, since there seems to be some concern about whether or not this issue is actually real, besides the numbers the Korean ambassador quoted, I'll just go through a few of the jobs that are posted. Nexstar Energy has posted a number of jobs, and this one from a general affairs specialist says fluency in Korean is required. Another one says fluency in Korean is required. Another one for material handler says language is Korean. Some of the summary of the list of some of the jobs: general affairs specialist, fluency in Korean; electrode quality engineer, bilingual English Korean; module production planner, English and Korean proficiency; module cell electrode quality engineer, bilingual in English and Korean; process quality engineer, bilingual Korean. And just so you don't think that this is made up from Nexstar, this is the Canadian Job Bank, the government of Canada, where there are a number of Nexstar jobs listed, and it said Korean language and asset. And just so there's some confusion around LMIAs and on the Government of Canada website and the Korean Free Trade Agreement, this actually says on the Government of Canada's website for this job, other candidates with or without a valid Canadian work permit, which means that that's the terms that allow you to come in and work at the plant without an MLIA. You just need a process through the Canada-Korea thing. So there are more than 22 jobs already listed, permanent jobs listed this way by Nexstar in this. So this is not made up. This is real. This is not some tweet by somebody. These are job postings, including on the Government of Canada website. Thank you.
Merci. J'ai Monsieur Généreux.
Thank you. I have Mr. Généreux. Thank you, Chair. Well, if the Government of Canada is comfortable, at ease, and feels that it is respecting its agreement with the countries that have decided to move operations into Canada, I have no problem with that. Well, there would be contracts that have been signed that perhaps include clauses about jobs that would be created, that all the information in these contracts be openly and transparently offered to the committee and to Canadians. That would be wonderful, so that we could check to see whether these contracts are, based on what my colleague has just pointed out, whether this really will lead to Canadian jobs or to jobs that will be subsidized by Canadians but for Koreans. Now, I'm a business person. Like Mr. Sorbara, I have worked with a number of manufacturing facilities. And very true, when you have new equipment, it's quite standard to have foreign workers come in, set up the equipment, and train people to use it. But here we're talking about perhaps 1,600 people who would be coming over to work in this plant to install equipment and train. Well, if that's the case, we should be told as much. The minister should come to tell us so. The business should come to tell us so. And the players should come to tell us so. They should also tell us how long these foreign employees would be there in Windsor. What we have understood from the outset is that this company, well, that the aim of the government is to create Canadian jobs for Canadians in Canada. A Canadian's a Canadian, a Canadian. I think that's good. Same for Quebec, of course. Mr. Sorbara, you're quite right. Northvolt that will be coming in. Swedes will certainly come in for a certain amount of time to help set it up. Will they ask that the employees speak French, English, and Swedish, probably, when they call for employees? But would these be long-term jobs, permanent positions, or just temporary? If we're told that people are coming in to install equipment that will last 6 months, if they've been at this for 30 years, making batteries in North Korea, or rather South Korea, then I imagine that it won't take them 30 years to set up their equipment here and get it up and running here in Canada and have productivity at its maximum level here in Canada. So I imagine there will be a specific window, a time frame within which all this will take place. Equipment installed and Canadians trained. If that's the case, come and tell us. That's transparency. But this government in 2015 stated very clearly, the Prime Minister said that they would be the most transparent government of all Canadian history. And I'm terribly sad to say that's not exactly what we've seen. If the parliamentary secretary comes before us, and as they did, and say, oh, the Conservatives have no environment plan and they fear this type of investment, this is just madness. The Conservative government of Canada throughout the history of Canada has created more free trade agreements than any other government in our history. And that has created the Canada of today. What we have now is debt. Debt and more debt. Just considering what we've just learned in the House of Commons, the Fall Economic Statement, there's no possibility of that changing for another 10 years. Given what this Liberal government has done. So some things aren't working, and that seems to be entrenched. But about the motion we have before us and the contracts that we are considering right now, We must ensure that the information that the government used to make its decisions be brought before us to ensure transparency. And if we're going to have 1,600 Korean workers coming to work in Canada, we need to ensure that these be temporary positions in order to avoid Canadians subsidizing long-term jobs for foreigners. Thank you, Mr. Généreux. Mr. Van Bynen.
And I'll be very brief. And when we're looking at this situation where we're trying to encourage foreign investment into the Canadian economy, I reflect back on a situation that I was directly involved with the global enterprise of Celestica. And there was an opportunity there for us to compete with a number of other municipalities and other jurisdictions. We were successful. We created hundreds of jobs in our small community, and we were able to do that on the basis of collaboration. We engaged the federal, the provincial, the regional, and the municipal authorities to work together to let Celestica know that it was important for us to create the jobs that their investment would do for our community. And those jobs were important in terms of creating additional employment for our community. But one of the things that I keep hearing now is that these jobs are going to foreign workers. Well, the foreign workers pay rent. They buy groceries. They support retail industries, and that money is being spent locally. And I think we sometimes find it all too easy to overlook those things. But what's disappointing for me is the tone in which all of this happens. If we portray that, how does this portray Canada? Does it portray Canada as a country that welcomes investment, wants to collaborate and work with, as opposed to kick around every project like a football and vilify the investments? If I was an investor, I certainly wouldn't be interested in dealing in those kinds of circumstances. So I think this oppositional method, we should overlook that and start putting before us the importance that this has to our country, to the jobs that it creates for Windsor, and to the secondary jobs that it supports in that area. So I would hope that we would develop an attitude of welcoming, an attitude of collaboration, an attitude of working together so that Canada not only becomes but strengthens its profile as a place to invest.
Merci, Mr. Van Bynen. Monsieur Turnbull.
Thank you, Mr. Van Bynen. Mr. Turnbull, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Chair. Appreciate Mr. Van Bynen's comments. I appreciate the comment about tone and just how I think we want to be welcoming of investment. And also, it strikes me that there could be a chord of xenophobia through this a little bit too. That it's sort of, it's in there in terms of, Thank you, Mr. Perkins, for interrupting me once again, speaking out of turn, which is, no, you shouldn't actually, because it's against the rules of committee. Well, I'm not misleading anybody.
À l'ordre, je veux que ça.
Well, look, I would like this to come to an end.
Comité, je le tolérerai plus là. Donc, please keep your comments yourself. When you have the floor, you have the floor. Otherwise, one member is speaking. Mr. Turnbull.
Thanks, Chair. I appreciate that. I think what's interesting is that we've heard quite a lot. I've heard a lot of numbers just about how much the global clean economy and clean energy investments are increasing dramatically. In fact, recently I heard an expert in this area talk about how clean energy investments globally have actually surpassed the fossil fuel related investments by 1.8, so almost double. So the tides are shifting, and I think we want to make sure that Canada gets its fair share of that global economic growth. And I think what we're seeing to date is that we are positioned well to get that, and we're competing with our investment tax credits, with the Canada Growth Fund, and our government's securing these essential investments for building that future economy. So I think the key for us is to acknowledge at the outset here that these investments are good for the Canadian economy. They're good for workers. We've seen within the electric vehicle supply chain, the investments are right across the supply chain. So there's investments, and I'm referring now to the fall economic statement. I know we kind of missed it in some sense because of the members feeling the need to have this debate today, but that's fine. Here we are. Mining and refining, there's been significant investments. There's been significant investments in processing and components. Battery manufacturing, which we're really discussing today, which are sizable and I think really important investments. Parts and assembly, and even recycling that's in development. So it really is the whole value chain, which is great to see. I think we can all agree that that's good news for this country. So anyway, what I want to do is maybe propose an amendment. So I'm uncomfortable with the preamble to the motion. So what I'd like to propose, and I don't have the amended motion in front of me, Chair, so because we've been members have been amending on the fly. So please excuse if there's anything out of order here, we can maybe rectify it. It would actually be probably good to have that sent around, the amended motion, but maybe I'll just make my best effort to amend it one more time and see what happens here. Hopefully members will agree. So I would like to propose that the Standing Committee on Industry and Technology undertake. I'd like to strike a lot of the wording, a 6-hour study, so that I'll start again, that the Standing Committee on Industry and Technology undertake a 6-hour study on the use of foreign workers at the EV battery manufacturing facility in Windsor, Ontario, to support the implementation of a new EV battery industry in Canada and the training of Canadian workers, and that the committee invite the following witnesses. So that's the amendment I'd like to propose. So it eliminates the very biased, I think, preamble that I think would inhibit us from getting to consensus on doing some work on this topic. So it's less biased. I think hopefully all members could agree to it. It's an honest attempt to try and amend this and maybe get to some consensus today if members are serious about doing this work. So I'll leave it at that.
So basically, what you're proposing would come right before, like 2 dots, and then we have the witnesses listed, the ministers. So that's the part it would.
That's correct. Yeah.
It would remove. So okay. Have all members heard the terms of the amendment proposed by Mr. Turnbull? Mr. Perkins. I know we're all doing it on the fly. Is there some way to get that preamble sort of emailed around to us? I think it goes down to where it starts with witnesses. Is that basically where it ends? Can you read it again? My understanding is that basically, instead of given that the Government of Canada, it would start with what you just read out, Mr. Turnbull. Can you read it again?
What part would, just so I understand, what part's taken out and replaced from the beginning to?
So we're basically replacing a lot of the language so it's the whole preamble is basically taken out and replaced with language. I'll read it out.
No.
Starting at given.
And going to?
And going to the 2 dots where the witnesses are
all of that's
listed.
taken out,
Okay.
other than the hours,
replaced.
which is going to be 6 hours. But so it says that the Standing Committee on Industry and Technology undertake a 6-hour study, and then I'm replacing on the use of foreign workers at the EV battery manufacturing facility in Windsor, Ontario, to support the implementation of a new EV battery industry in Canada and the training of Canadian workers, and that the committee invite the following witnesses.
Witnesses being the ones already agreed to
The witness list is, the witness list is consistent with what was already there. Yeah.
The witness list remains
I
the
do
one
have thoughts
as
about
amended by
witnesses.
Mr. Massey. And I recognize Mr. Massey, speaking of which I just noticed your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just real briefly to the amendment, I do support that in terms of our committee trying to be constructive, because I think that what we all want is good jobs at the end of the day for this. And if we can find some consensus on this, it's something that is important for me in the sense that we go forward, because this is a difficult thing to deal with. But I think we're being responsible here. It was responsible to have the debate here and the discussion. I appreciate Mr. Perkins bringing the motion forward, and I appreciate Mr. Lemire's amendment and also Mr. Turnbull's. I think that we can do some good work in the history of this committee has really been centered around consensus, and I think that this is appropriate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair, I keep calling you Mr. Speaker.
That was a couple of weeks ago, Mr. Massey, the election of the Speaker. I stay here as chair. So thank you, Mr. Massey, for your comments. I think the clerk has just received the text of the amendment and will circulate it to members. But in the meantime, has everyone heard the terms of the amendment, and are you all in agreement with it? I'm looking around the table. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page.
I think so. I just want to read it.
You want to read it? Okay, so Jen, we'll just wait a second for... It'll take a couple of minutes, so maybe Mr. Turnbull, if you want to read it again.
Or suspend until then.
Or we can suspend just for members to know we have a hard stop at 5:52. Well, it's not what the clerk has told me, but I appreciate I have a second clerk in the person of Mr. Perkins. So we'll suspend for 2 minutes for the email to reach your inboxes, and we'll get back.
New clerk can
in your inboxes, so you can have a look at the amendment proposed by Mr. Turnbull, and now that you can all read it.
I think it's missing the word undertake A.
Yeah, it's supposed to be undertake A.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I think it's
I said that, but it wasn't typed. So my apologies.
Undertake A, yeah, I noticed it as well.
Or a 6-hour study, yeah.
So I know that
Juste
Mr.
s'assurer
Mass.
que les interprètes puissent recevoir la motion.
The interpreters have not received the motion.
Juste une seconde, monsieur.
Just a moment, Mr. Lemire. Thank you.
En français, je note que
In French, I note that in the text we read 2 o'clock, but I think it's supposed to be 6 o'clock? Or 6 hours, rather. 2 hours are mentioned as it's written now, but I believe we should be speaking of 6 hours.
Massey changed.
It's just for the
Prior amendments are not there.
We're just dealing with
yeah, okay, no, but it's understood. Like I understand that we're doing this on the fly, as was mentioned before, but the witnesses would be the ones as listed by Mr. Massé, and not the ones of the original motion. So you've all heard the amendment of Mr. Turnbull. I'm looking around the table to see if there is consensus on this proposed amendment, or if we should. I get the thumbs up from Mr. Perkins. So it is amended by what Mr. Turnbull has proposed. I see Mr. Lemire as well agreeing. So we've got the motion as, and Mr. Massé said earlier that he agreed with the change in wording of the preamble by Mr. Turnbull. So it's adopted. So we have the motion as now as amended. Are there any other amendments or comments on the main motion, Mr. Turnbull?
So I have another amendment to propose here, and I hope we can get to some consensus on this. I know that we've spoken about contracts in the past, and I know that members have wanted them to be made, in a sense, public, that the committee be allowed to view those contracts. I think so. I want to propose something that I think is a good compromise that I think is sort of building off a precedent that was done or implemented for the VW contracts prior. So maybe I'll propose the wording, Chair, and just to be clear, this is not a part of the witness list that was proposed by Mr. Massey. So it's really the part that's dealing with all documents related to government funding, Canada job creation, etc. So this would be my proposal for the amended wording. And the committee requests the contract with Stellantis LG regarding Nexstar EV battery manufacturing facility in Windsor, Ontario, with job numbers unredacted in both official languages upon adoption of the motion, that the contract be available at the clerk's office for viewing by committee members for a minimum of 48 hours before the meeting under the supervision of the clerk, and that no personal, mobile, electronic, or recording devices of any kind be permitted in the room that week, and that no notes be taken out of the room, and that the committee meet with ISED officials in camera following the viewing of the contract. So, in essence, we'd have access. We'd all have access as committee members on this, permanent committee members on this committee, to the contract for no less than 48 hours prior to meeting with the ISED officials. And we'd also see the unredacted job numbers. So obviously there's still some redactions that are necessary, but the job numbers would be unredacted, and in both official languages, of course. So just reviewing that. I can send along an email with the proposed language if you'd like. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, and I appreciate, Mr. Turnbull, what you're trying, what the purpose of the amendment. For those who may not know, when we had a similar motion and viewed the Volkswagen contracts, the jobs weren't redacted in that. It was other things that were redacted, the construction schedule and the production numbers. So that's not a fear, but it's a little challenging and difficult for us to question witnesses in a study on this if we actually don't get access to any form of this contract publicly, because the rules of seeing them in confidence is that you can't talk about the contract. So I will oppose this amendment simply because I'm not going to have my hands tied about what I can and cannot ask the witnesses about.
D'accord, mais c'est clair.
Very well.
What the terms of the amendment is. Mr. Turnbull, I see you want to.
I just wanted to say that I think if we had a meeting with ISED officials in camera, we could speak to them and question them about the contract. It just wouldn't be able to be in public, obviously. I think that removes the challenges with having seen something that would normally not be given public access. We could, maybe deal with it that way, and that way members can be assured to be able to ask the questions that they want to ask the ISED officials. That to me seems like a good compromise. We could add, I know we've said 6 hours of meetings, so I'm thinking 3 meetings. I mean, the committee might choose to break it up in different ways. It might be an extra hour per meeting, but I'd rather see us do it in 3 2-hour meetings. That way we get, I think the ministers in one meeting, and I think the ambassador and any other witnesses in another meeting, and then probably a third meeting, which would be reviewing the contract, unredacted job numbers. Mr. Perkins already said that it was unredacted in or those numbers were unredacted in the previous Volkswagen contract. So that's great. So members will get the answers to their questions. And then they could ask questions to the ISED officials. That might be a way that we could move forward on this. So I would be interested to know what members of the various parties think. And I'll be sending along the wording of the proposed amendment. Right.
Okay. I have Mr. Massey.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just prefer to keep what we have in place at the moment. I thought we were working towards consensus, so I'm kind of surprised that this wasn't part of what we previously had, and hoping that we can actually, or whether we're procedurally now, I'm kind of a little confused about whether this is another sub-amendment or a separate motion outside of what took place, because we kind of took a break for dealing with the last one, and then having this thrust upon us is something that kind of is unusual. Because it would have been, because we just dealt with the Liberal amendment during the break. So and I'll go quickly. I know I see Mr. Turnbull's got his hand up, and I'll let him explain that. So, but I also don't want this to be purposeful with regards to the meetings, and I don't understand how, like, if we did that was suggested, would make our meetings purposeful, because this is more than just the Windsor jobs. This is about setting a precedent and also setting an expectation that we can get jobs for Canadians in Quebec, in other parts of Ontario, and also British Columbia. So I just want to keep that in focus. Thank you.
Monsieur Turnbull, je pense, veut réagir. Monsieur Massey.
Mr. Turnbull wants to react, Mr. Massey.
What's been
proposed. I'm sorry, Mr. Turnbull's not coming across. We've lost audio.
We'll just check. Can you hear me, Mr. Massey?
Yes, I can hear you, Mr. Chair.
Okay,
Just Mr. Turnbull. I know his mic was on too, but
okay, that's strange. Maybe if you use Madame Lapointe's microphone, Mr.
Can you hear me? Is my mic working?
Okay, so perhaps Mr. Turnbull, you can just use Viviane's microphone.
Okay, great. Oh, wow, that's much clearer. It could really work now. So I was just going to say to Mr. Massey that I totally appreciate the challenges with working on the fly like this. And, you know, I think we're all amending on the fly. So I appreciate your patience with that. And, you know, I'm putting things forward that relate to different pieces of and my reactions to the motion. So, you know, I think it's important, though, that we all agree that there is commercially sensitive information in these contracts. I think we can all agree that we wouldn't want to inhibit, you know, future contracts or inhibit the companies, you know, in terms of that sensitive information. I think it has to be kept confidential. We're offering here a solution that we, as members of Parliament, as permanent members of this committee, can view those contracts. It's consistent with the way we dealt with this at this committee for the VW contract. So I think it makes sense. And members, I think, had that opportunity before. So I would just say that we need to make sure that both that commercial information that's sensitive is protected, but also that Canada as a whole is not undermined in terms of its ability to negotiate. And I think that this is a pretty fair compromise so that members can get to the bottom of and have questions asked and answered based on viewing those documents. Thanks.
Merci, Monsieur Vice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm no expert. I did read, however, the Volkswagen contract signed between Volkswagen and the Government of Canada. And as I understood it, there is a requirement under other laws in Canada that the commercial sensitivity of a contract be considered. In the case of Volkswagen, the commercial sensitivities aren't determined by the government but by the other signatory. And I think the same precedent should apply when reviewing the Stellantis contract. It is not for the government to determine the commercial sensibility of the contract, but for Stellantis to do so. Thank you.
Monsieur Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you know, certainly we were all part of this committee when we looked at the Volkswagen contract. So I understand what Mr. Turnbull is trying to do. But when we got in there was only two pieces that were redacted, and they were really minor. Those documents could have been provided publicly because we didn't see anything that the public couldn't see. Everything was spoken about. I think we even asked several times afterwards to get those documents in the public because what we saw was nothing that wasn't already out there. So at the same time for this one, the government can provide these documents and provide those same redactions on production, on worker, but it's not going to stop publicly from officials that we've had in this committee, we've asked the witnesses to come here publicly to give those same numbers. So I think it allows this committee and the public to see exactly what's in there. If there's redactions that we have questions on, then there can be other motions made to go and look at those documents. And the same, I think, the same instance of which Mr. Turnbull has asked for. We have to have all of these instances come public because this is all public knowledge at this point. This was on the front page of the Globe and Mail today. And when we're looking at what we need to have for this committee to go forward, I think as Mr. Massey has stated, from Windsor West, that we need to ensure that we get the information publicly. This is a public meeting. So Canadians who are all reading this today, I don't know how many people read the Globe and Mail right now, but I'm sure it's over a couple million still. You know, they get the answers that they're looking for. Mr. Chair, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Perkins.
Alors, merci, Monsieur Perkins.
Globe and Mail, they wouldn't need a subsidy from the federal government, but I'll leave that. Mr. Chair, thank you. Mr. Turnbull, and just on the sort of process issue that we went through last time, and I'm assuming what happened in this process is that there was a construction contract with Stellantis before the IRA, and then after the IRA, Stellantis, a deal was signed for a construction contract and a separate contract for Volkswagen. The second contract dealt with the IRA response. The first contract dealt with the similar construction thing on that. So there were two contracts that we, Mr. Chair, there are two contracts that we wanted to see, and we saw both of them. And there was very little redacted, and that the clause that struck me in the contract, and I don't think this is sharing any confidence, is that it said that the government, before releasing the contract, which meant that the government could release the contract, had to ask the partner for which clauses they felt were confidentially sensitive, not what the government felt was confidentially sensitive. And I'm presuming that is the same clauses that might be in the Stellantis contract. I'm sure the government can comment on that. And most of, as my colleague Mr. Williams said, most of the things from what the amount of the subsidy is every year that's in the contract is actually lifted straight from the IRA, and that part of it is public, and the Parliamentary Budget Officer has spoken to it. What we haven't seen is these issues, although I've read them in the contract that's in Volkswagen. What we haven't seen is the conditions around job creation, how many jobs, those were in the Volkswagen contract, what the terms of those jobs are, and what the exemptions are for not meeting those commitments. And so it's hard to question the officials from the company or the minister or other officials as to whether or not they're complying with a contract that we can't talk about publicly. And that's why we believe that the contract, which I would expect would have a couple of redactions from the partner, not from the government, but from the partner, Stellantis in this case, would be fine to be released so that we can deal with it. Volkswagen did not redact the issues around job conditions in the contract that we saw. I'll leave it there, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. I have MP Sorbara.
Chair, through just a point of clarification to my honourable colleagues on the other side of this table, if you can just answer this for me. When we sit on committees, we can either be public, like we are now, or we can go in camera, where we discuss things and make decisions to a certain extent and see things. And then there's a point of redacted and unredacted documents in general. When you go in camera, or you may see redacted or unredacted documents depending on the nature. I wasn't here when you folks looked at the Volkswagen documents. I'm assuming it was done in camera, or it wasn't done in committee, but the documents, there was redactions on the documents that you saw. Correct. So are you saying that you would now want to have that same process where you were
I wouldn't ask the government, if I can.
Mr. Perkins, you can respond.
I wouldn't ask the government to break the terms of the contract on what elements and the role of the partner, in this case Stellantis, on the commercial sensitivity elements that they could choose or not choose on releasing public.
Because I just wanted, because I know Mr. Williams made an intervention, and I just wanted to was following along on that. I wasn't sure if I understood what the ask was in terms of redacted versus, and redacted documents in camera, not in camera. What the way we, the ask on your side was. I just wanted to clarify that, please.
Merci, Monsieur Van Bynen. Ensuite, Monsieur Turnbull.
Thank you, Mr. Van Byden, to be followed by Mr. Turnbull.
And I was part of the group that had an opportunity to look at the other contract, the earlier contracts. I guess it's not what we think is important, it's what the other party thinks is important and confidential. And my concern is how do we determine what that is? Are we going to approach the other party? They would redact it. So I think we need to respect that. And this also comes back to this notion I had raised earlier around tone. We really don't want to be a hostile environment, or we really don't want people who are interested in investing in us not to see this as a favorable economic environment where we work together to find solutions. And so it's important that we respect those commercial confidential factors, and how we go about doing that, I think, is quite critical.
Merci, Monsieur Van Bynen. Monsieur Turnbull.
Thank you, Mr. Van Byden. Mr. Turnbull, the floor is yours.
I wanted to just clarify as well. So your original motion called for the committee order the full unredacted contract. I think my colleague, Mr. Sorbera, made a good point about clarifying, unredacted copies that you can see in camera or in a room are very different than redacted copies that you'd see in public. So I'm just wondering whether, your original motion is calling for something that, to me, can't happen, which is full unredacted contracts in the committee. So what I'm asking is, if they're viewed in public, they will have to be redacted. So we were trying to offer you the opportunity to see the least redactions possible in camera, so that you could get answers to your questions. So that's a good faith effort. Now, there's still going to be some redactions, of course, but would be less than what you'd get if you had a redacted copy in public. So the point is, what level, I'm just clarifying, because for me, I think we've had a good conversation about this, but we're trying to offer more. If you want these contracts in public, they're going to have to be more heavily redacted. So I think based on, we know that there's some limitations to what can be out there that's commercially sensitive, right? So I think we have to be responsible about this, and I think that the tone Mr. Van Bynen talked about. So I just want to clarify what you're actually looking for here. Would you accept a public version that's redacted?
Let Mr. Perkins respond. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. It's a good question, Mr. Turnbull. So I know what we're trying to do is get the most unredacted, I guess, in a perfect world, no redaction copy possible. And I'm assuming, since the minister said these contracts are similar, that it's up to the company contractually to choose, not the government, what is redacted and not. So I think it's a little presumptuous to say that you think the company would choose to redact more than what we've said. It may be that they're willing to let all of it go out. We don't know that. That's the choice of the partner. So, but we would like the public document as per the terms probably of the contract that say it's up to Stellantis to choose what's public and not the government.
Okay, so I understand that maybe we're making progress, but in any event, there is an amendment that is already on the floor, presented by Mr. Turnbull. I also understand that it's been circulated to all members by the clerk. So if we can just rein in the discussion on this, Mr. Turnbull.
Yeah, so I'm not discounting the fact that there's some unknowns with how much a company will want redacted. I totally agree that may be a factor we don't have control over, but there are some obligations, I would think, for us to have some redactions in those contracts as well. But my understanding is, either way, what are we really looking for here? And I'd be interested to hear from other colleagues around the table where they stand on this. I think it's important to, ensure that we're not committing to revealing more information than a company would want. And I think I think we can all acknowledge that we don't want to commit to an unredacted version, which is what the Conservatives had in their original motion, which I think we can all agree is not appropriate, given the fact that you've already admitted that the companies themselves will want redactions. Even if we don't know exactly how much they'll want redacted, we know that they'll want some redactions, and that's pretty consistent with past discussions and agreements at this committee, as I understand. So I'd be interested to know what my other colleagues from the NDP and the Bloc think about the proposal that I've put forward, to see where they stand. Thanks.
Thank you, MP Turnbull. And just before I yield the floor to MP Massé online, I'll just note for members' benefits that I was informed by the clerk that after all, we have resources until 7:52. It doesn't mean that we need to use them, but they are there. Mr. Massé, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be quick. And I do appreciate Mr. Turnbull's, I think it's a sincere approach about dealing with sensitive information, but I think Mr. Perkins played it out, about right at where we're at. And I've been consistently on the record for a national auto policy that's transparent, believing in that the workers and the investment is worthwhile. So I understand where this is coming from, but I can't support it for those reasons.
Merci, Monsieur Massé.
Thank you, Mr. Massé. Any other comments about the amendment on the floor? If we have no further speakers, I will. Yes, Mr. Turnbull.
Ask, what will we do if the company wants to redact heavily the contract? Will the Conservatives be satisfied with that? Will other members be satisfied with that? It seems to me that we don't have, if you're admitting that we don't have control over what level of redactions are included, I anticipate that the members opposite will be disappointed if they don't have information that they're looking for. So to me, there's an advantage to reviewing contracts that are lightly redacted in camera to get if you're really interested in getting the answers that you want. To me, that seems quite reasonable, which I've offered that as the amendment, right? So, maybe we just want to vote on the amendment and then debate the motion further, but I'm hoping that we can get to some consensus on this amendment.
Oui, j'ai Monsieur Perkins.
I have Mr. Perkins.
Mr. MP Turnbull, I guess the answer to my question is I will leave it in the capable hands of Stellantis and the government to abide by the agreement that's probably there about that Stellantis' ability to choose what's commercially sensitive and not. And I know in the case of Volkswagen, they only redacted 3 parts of it. I suspect Volkswagen didn't trust that any politician would keep it secret no matter what they showed us. So I'm willing to live with at this stage and see what it is that the contract produces publicly and what Stellantis is willing to put out from on that in public, and we'll look at it from there. But and I appreciate the offer, and I really do, MP Turnbull, appreciate the offer to allow us access in private the way we had it to the Volkswagen contract. But at this stage, I'd be much more comfortable saying that these contracts, I think both of them should be public. But in this case, we're dealing specifically with a motion about the plant in Windsor and the contract around that. And I'm talking about the 2 contracts. Remember, there's 2 contracts, SIF and the production contract, the production subsidy contract. So I'm willing to see what Stellantis is willing to let go public. So yes, I hope that answers your question.
Merci, Monsieur Perkins. Je Monsieur Van Bynen.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. I have Mr. Van Byden.
Discussion around the impact of the amendments. I'd just like to get some clarification. I wonder if we could suspend for a few moments and have a look at the text and look at the amendment in the context of the total motion.
I'll suspend, but very, very briefly, because it's been in your inboxes for a while now while this has been discussed. And it's also, that's a fair point too, Mr. Perkins. It's an amendment that's from the Liberal side. So I'm tempted not to suspend, actually, Mr. Van Bynen. And I'm looking around the room to see if there is a need for that. I don't sense it. Monsieur Lemire, vous avez besoin de suspendre pour...
You think we need a suspension? Chair, I certainly will respect whatever you decide.
Go ahead, Mr. Chair.
Monsieur, mais bon, je suis prêt. Oui, monsieur.
I'm ready. Yes, Mr. Turnbull.
I'm really concerned that we'll be, disclosing to the public things that could be commercially sensitive, I think that could have a negative impact on further deals, could have a negative impact on the Government of Canada's ability to negotiate. I think these deals, come with some pretty substantive agreements that are worked out and negotiated over time that I think companies would feel are quite sensitive. So I'm just a little, confused as to what the objective really is here if members aren't willing to get more information, more clarity in camera. So is this, really about revealing unredacted copies to the public and having that information be out there and undermining some of these companies' ability to attract further investment? Or, it seems like a pretty counterproductive thing. And I mean, that's what's in the original motion. So if members were intending on being, getting to the bottom of this, you'd think that they would actually vote for more information. Access to more information would be better. So I'm a little bit confused as to what the intent is here. I'm sure it's not to undermine future investments or negotiations between Canada and other countries. And I'm sure, and I'm hopeful that it's not to reveal things that are within those contracts that shouldn't be anything but held in the strictest confidentiality. So maybe members want to comment on that, but it just still strikes me as a bit of a sticking point here, because I'm trying to understand the motivations of my colleagues.
I have Mr. Perkins.
Thank you. Well, the motivation's simple: transparency. $15 billion of taxpayer money going to subsidize one of the largest foreign auto companies in the world. And there should be transparency on where it's going. Understanding that there may be, but I don't see it when I read the Volkswagen contract, anything that's really commercially sensitive in this, because most of the issues either the ministers talked about or they're in the IRA. So I don't know why the Liberals are afraid of it, but apparently Mark Miller, your colleague, a minister of the Crown, just tweeted, South Koreans are eligible to work at the Nexstar EV factory. So what is it? Are they not allowed to, or are they allowed to? Perhaps we should listen to a minister of the Crown. But going forward, that's why we need transparency, and we need to hear from witnesses on the public contract and what the company is willing to put out about what's going on here.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull, and then Mr. Gahir.
Well, I appreciate the comments, but I respectfully, I don't think the intention of the original motion was about the $15 billion. It's really about local jobs, right? I mean, I think that's what the 106.4 was about. Mr. Perkins, you already know those numbers based on what's been, clearly identified by the minister. So isn't it really just a verification that those numbers are in this contract? And to me, we're saying, well, no problem. We can provide a lightly redacted, version of it in camera for you to verify that, contrary to what you've claimed, which is that somehow the minister is not being forthright and transparent about this. If it's really about transparency, then isn't it about seeing whether those numbers that we've been saying publicly are actually reflected in the contract? And as per the minister's comments, I have the article where the minister has said very clearly that under Prime Minister Harper, a free trade agreement was negotiated with South Korea that allows for it has reciprocity as well. It allows for South Korean workers to come to Canada. So if the Conservatives set it up, now you're concerned about local jobs? You're concerned about the local jobs of workers, and yet you're the party that allowed South Koreans to come here without
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
visa in previous...
Well, Mr. Turnbull.
Okay, I hope it's a point
I'm sure
of order.
Mr. Turnbull is trying not to say that you would be responsible, Mr. Chair. If the member would kindly go through you when making his outlandish accusations, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Duly noted. If it's possible, given the context of this discussion, to go speak through the chairs.
Sure, yeah,
Mr.
absolutely. I'll just end by saying that to me, there's a very clear indication in Minister Miller's remarks that were quoted in the CBC article that very clearly that free trade agreement allows for South Korean workers to come to Canada, and those are called intercompany transfers, and individuals who are helping train and get facilities started, the first ever battery manufacturing facility in Canada. One would expect some of those South Korean workers who are highly trained and skilled to be coming to Canada to ensure that Canadian workers can fulfill, and learn the skills that they need. So I understand that some of those skills and some of those jobs are, require a skill set that, and not to mention that companies have very specific ways in which they want to train their workers, and part of that is a part of their brand, right? So anyway, I think if members want to debate this further, we can continue, or maybe we're prepared to move to a vote on the amendment.
I'm going to speak to this. I'm going to call him out on the xenophobic.
Okay, so I understand that on the Liberal side there's a willingness to proceed with a vote, but I still have some speakers. I have Mr. Massey and Mr. Viss. Brian.
Call the vote, Mr. Chair.
I have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I can't until the speaker's list is exhausted, so I have... So if you have no comments, Mr. Massey, I move to Mr. Viss. Yield the floor to Mr. Viss.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just clarify a few points, and then I believe it is in order to go to a vote as well. First off, I'm going to put it on the record. Mr. Turnbull stated earlier that we were making comments that were xenophobic in nature. Those weren't his exact words, but he did use the word xenophobic. I'm going to put it on the record that we all take partisan angles at this committee, but if he's going to go down that path, here's my word. I vow to make his job as hard as possible as a parliamentary secretary, and I'm putting that on the public record. You have no reason to do that. I said in the very beginning of this meeting that the Conservatives did, in fact, sign a free trade agreement with labor mobility provisions in the contract. You obviously weren't listening to the debate earlier on. That was never in question. It's very insulting that you did that. You turned around and you tried to make it better in the end. Thank you. But don't personalize the debate here, Mr. Chair. We cannot personalize the debate in the way that the parliamentary secretary did today. We work very well in this committee, but I am stating as a fact on behalf of my constituents, if he starts doing that, it's not going to be easy for him to get the things that he wants to get done.
Point of order, Chair.
It was so inappropriate.
Okay.
I actually feel that the member threatened me here at this committee, and that cannot happen at committees. No matter what I say, I have the freedom of expression in this committee as a member of Parliament, and if I want to say you're xenophobic, I can say you're xenophobic. I didn't say that. I said there's a xenophobic tone, is exactly what I said. I didn't call you xenophobic, but it doesn't matter. I'm allowed to say what I want to say, and you're not allowed to threaten members of Parliament.
Alors,
it's not a threat.
Order. Mr. Turnbull, it's not true that you can say whatever you want, neither you or anyone else, as a matter of fact. We do have to respect the decorum, and it will not tolerate any personal attacks coming from either side of the aisle, first. Number two, Mr. Viss, I do encourage you to watch out. It's true that it was close to a threat, and I will not tolerate such threats in my committee either. In this committee, rather, either. I think we can certainly raise above the level that we're seeing right now. So let's all take a deep breath and come back to more civil statements and more decorum from either side. Thank you. And now, if there are no more speakers on the list, I believe we can finally move to the vote on this motion as amended by Mr. Turnbull. So I will ask the clerk to proceed with the vote on the amendment.
On the amendment, in the name of Mr. Turnbull. Mr. Turnbull.
For.
Mr. Gahir.
In favor?
Mr. Sorbara.
En favor.
Mr. Van Bynen.
Oui.
Ms. Thompson.
In favor.
Mr. Généreux.
No.
Mr. Perkins.
No.
Mr. Viss. Mr. Viss.
No.
Mr. Williams.
No.
Monsieur Lemire.
En faveur.
Mr. Massey.
No.
Alors, l'amendement est...
So the amendment is adopted. It's carried, rather. Which brings us back to the motion as amended many times over. Are there any other comments? Any other amendments? Otherwise, we can proceed to the vote on the motion as amended.
More comments or amendments, and I see no one. That's the best moment of the meeting. So if there are no more comments, we can probably vote on the motion as amended, and it's clear to everyone where we stand right now on this motion, even given all the amendments that we have. And do we need at this point to vote? I'm looking around the table, or is there a consensus to adopt the motion as was amended? I see agreement from, okay. Wow. So the motion is adopted. We've got consensus. I thank you all, and I hope we have a more... No. I hope we have a more peaceful meeting next meeting. Cette rencontre est ajournée. Merci aux...
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you to interpreters. Thank you to every member of the staff. Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.